Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 10th February 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, delighted to be joined by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, who'll be speaking to us by link from Edinburgh. And we've also got Ben Rubin talking to us today from London. Plus, we have a special guest. Now, we're going to get started right away with the subject of the Lucy Letby trial again. Now, we weren't expecting to do this, but I'm going to say over the weekend I was provided with some really exceptional information by an individual who watches the UK column on a regular basis. And they were aware both of the Bonnie Lewis story that we mentioned and, of course, our special report last Monday on the connection between Bonnie Lewis, the Bonnie Lewis case and Lucy Letby's trial. So this, of course, on screen was our flyer. An old child snatching case takes on new meaning for Lucy's trial. And this was an exclusive report. And we were also giving praise to Unheard, who had spoken to us. And that resulted in UK Column checking out some of our archive material. Now, if you're new to the report, I'm just going to recap very, very briefly key facts of the Bonnie Lewis case that we reported back in 1998, that a young girl was very ill. She was in severe pain, and her mother was continually striving to get a diagnosis and obviously get that pain treated. Into the picture came Dr. Dewi Evans, expert witness in the Lucy Letby trial. And he effectively took control of the child protection team and blocked the mother from independent medical advice. But most importantly, he labelled her essentially attention-seeking by proxy to remove Bonnie from her mother. And we put up quite a lot of detail about this case. Let's just put this one up on. This was the report that in 1997, July the 25th, at the first social services conference on the Bonnie Lewis case, Evans said that there was nothing wrong with Bonnie, but the mother was the problem. Now, the thing was that Bonnie had been in intense pain for some considerable time with no diagnosis. What then took place was that Dr. Dewi Evans manoeuvred to actually get control of the case. And these are some of the notes that we put up on screen to show that the research was real. And here, Dr. Evans was saying it was noted that the family have agreed to work with the child case individuals, and they've decided not to enter the child's name on the child protection register. But effectively, this was holding the family hostage to him and his particular designs on the case. And later on, even though Dr. Dewi Evans knew that Bonnie was unwell, and he was one of the individuals that had failed to diagnose her illness, it was the mother who was then attacked. And he was casually saying here that if the girl was well, which she certainly was not, she should be at school. And finally, this is part of the text where he describes the mother as attention-seeking by proxy. And that was the label that subsequently meant that social services teams took control of the daughter. Now, thanks to an individual overseas who has been following both cases and the latest UK column report, I'm going to share this with our audience, and I just find this quite incredible. This is a report from Monday, the 19th of November, 1990. It's from the South Wales Evening Post, and the key headline on the left is Child Abuse Jail Worry. The full article I've just brought up on screen for you to see. But let's take some of the information out of this because it features the very same Dr. Dewi Evans. And in the article, which is talking about the setting up of a unit to basically help support children who've been abused, Dr. Dewi Evans is quoted as saying that many perpetrators of sexual acts with young children do not understand and cannot be made to understand that they've done wrong. He goes on to say people's lack of guilt and ignorance of wrongdoing after sexually abusing children supported an argument for, quote, decriminalizing the offence. The article continued. Dr. Evans, a leading child specialist at Morriston and Neath Hospitals, was speaking in his capacity as a West Glamorgan County councillor on a debate on a new initiative to help children overcome the trauma of being the innocent victims of abuse. So it's about helping victims of abuse, children who have been victims of child abuse, but Dr. Dewi Evans is much more concerned with the perpetrators of that abuse. Let's have a look at how the article went on here. No one on the Children's Subcommittee was against the initiative. That's for the Unit for the Children, which is a county council partnership with National Children's Home starting next spring and costing more than £500,000 to run over the next 5 years. It continues. The Social Services Committee will now be recommended to finally approve the scheme, which also involves the purchase and fitting out of a project house, probably in the Port Talbot area, where the incidence of child abuse is most rife in West Glamorgan. And then we come back onto the comments from Dr. Dewi Evans. Councillor Dr. Evans described this debate as a highly charged issue and said that there was an argument for decriminalising sexual offences against young children. We'll add to this as well. There are people who do not consider they've done anything wrong. That is with regard to sexualising children, sexually abusing children. And you can't counsel someone who feels he's done nothing wrong. Now, at the end of the article, there was a quote from the Assistant Social Services Director, Colin Priest. He said he did not want to enter into the national, a highly controversial debate on decriminalising child sexual abuse, but he was effectively agreeing that the general experience was that abusers then carried out similar offences on release. But the reason that we feel this is so important is here is Dr. Dewi Evans clearly supporting people who've abused children. They appear to be his priority in this council meeting over and above the children who have been abused. And yet, whilst he has been supporting abusers in this debate, his whole focus in the Bonnie Lewis case was on removing a child from the protective mother who he accused of having problems. So he's happy to support abusers of abuse, those who have carried out abuse. But when we come to a mother who's desperately tried to protect her child, then he's much more free. He's demonstrating that he's much happier to attack the mother themselves in order to get that child away from a loving home and into social security, child protection system. So I think that we really have to ask some very big questions about this man. Personally, I'm going to ask if this man is safe to be working with children or indeed families, and seeing this against the background that the state is using him in the Lucy Letby trial. Is he credible? Is this man really credible as the state's expert witness? And Diane, if I can just ask you very quickly here, what's your opinion? You were kind enough to give some help having a look at the provenance of the article. The article is genuine, but what are your thoughts about what he had to say at that meeting?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. It's really important to check the source of any articles, especially when you have someone who's sent something to you. You really do want to make sure that it is what it says it was. And I was able to confirm through, there's a couple of databases online that provide archives of articles. One that I used for this one was newspapers.com. There's another one for specifically British newspapers, and you can frequently access these through your public library if you belong to your local library or a local university library. So I would always suggest doing that. Reading those words, as you said, when I looked at this for you yesterday, I was absolutely shocked. There's something so reminiscent of, dare I say, Jimmy Savile kinds of things, saying, well, these people aren't necessarily criminals, or, is he making excuses for himself? Is he making excuses for whoever his mates are that might have been doing these kinds of things? And how can you possibly say that? And we're seeing that currently as well with what we used to call pedophilia, now that the politically correct term is minor attracted persons, minor attracted people. And there are academics and so on that are making excuses for these people, saying, oh, they shouldn't be stigmatized. So I'm really quite concerned that with this trial going on, and with what we can start to see about Dr. Dewey Evans and what he said back then, what exactly is going on. And so I plan to continue working with you to investigate this man, to see what else we can find that might potentially further question his credibility in the Lucy Letby case, as you've said.
Thank you for that, Diane. Well, I'm just going to add a little bit to this. This is an old report from the UK column in 2009, when we've been reporting on the abuse of a Down syndrome girl called Holly Gregg. And in this particular article, we pointed out that BBC Scotland had abruptly dropped their inquiries into the case of Holly Gregg on the basis of mental health problems. Let's pop this up on screen so that we can see. We wrote, BBC suddenly decided to drop their investigation on the basis that, and this is the quote from the BBC themselves, we would be unable to defend a libel action from anyone we accuse of abuse when such a wealth of material exists to suggest that one of our principal contributors suffered mental health problems at the time when the allegations were first made. Now, the insidious nature of this quote from the BBC is the fact that in the Holly Gregg case, it was also the mother who had been trying to protect her daughter and had spoken out. It was the mother that was accused of mental health problems. In fact, she was grabbed from the doorway of her home. She had a needle with some drug stuck into her backside, and she was then taken unconscious to a psychiatric unit where she was accused of being mentally ill. The BBC did not want to investigate that and simply said, oh, well, she's been accused of mental health problems and that's the end of it. A similarity in a way with the Bonnie Lewis case. But if we go back to another report from the UK column, this is December 2012, we were pointing out that the then politician Harriet Harman was under an attack over a bid to water down child pornography laws, and she called on ministers to make sexually explicit photographs or films of children legal unless there was evidence that the subject had been harmed. At the time she made the official submission, she was a senior figure in a civil liberties organisation that wanted the age of consent to be lowered to 14 and incest decriminalised. It also defended self-confessed paedophiles in the press and allowed them to attend its meetings. And if we just put this in a bit more of a diagrammatic form, we had both Harriet Harman as the legal officer of the National Council for Civil Liberties, and we had the politician Patricia Hewitt as the General Secretary, and National Council for Civil Liberties had been connected with the Paedophile Information Exchange and Paedophile Action for Liberty. So our message really to our viewers and listeners today is that if we look into the establishment and we look into the political establishment, we get little reassurance that the state is actually protecting children from abusers. And we clearly got to do a lot more digging to get the truth up to the surface. But that is the connection today. Further, I think very concerning evidence coming to the surface that in the Lucy Letby case, at least, expert witnesses, not credible in our opinion, or certainly deserving to be questioned over what their true beliefs and motives are. We'll leave that there. Diane, probably the subject is, can we trust the state? And of course, you've been pointing out that many people in Scotland have been deeply concerned about COVID and the COVID lockdown, and you've got a special guest for us today.
Yes, I do, Brian. And I just want everyone to be aware that in Scotland, the restrictions, the lockup restrictions and everything else was much stricter up here and lasted for much longer than it did down south in England. And with that, I want to introduce my guest today, who is Professor Richard Ennos. He's been interviewed previously by UK Column, and I now work with him as an executive committee member of Common Knowledge Edinburgh, which he chairs. And with that, I would like to welcome Richard to the program. Richard, if you would maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what you're working on currently as the chair of Common Knowledge.
My background is I was a professor of evolutionary biology. I've been retired about 9 years now. But since 2020, March 2020, I've been against all of the restrictions that have been placed on normal people in Scotland as a consequence of the COVID-19, the alleged COVID-19 disease. I've been involved in demonstrations. I've been involved in yellow board demonstrations. I've been involved in setting up Common Knowledge, which is an attempt to bring together people who want to know more about what's going on. And so it's a kind of free speech group, and we get speakers from all over lots of different disciplines to try and understand what's going on and allow people to negotiate what's happening at the moment in the best possible way.
So I think common knowledge is a very appropriate term for it, because it seems to me that with a lot of members of the public who are still buying into the COVID narrative, that common knowledge is something that we have lost over the past 5 years. It's just been absolutely amazing to me that people are still buying into it, and they're still being afraid of the current propaganda that's coming out about the bird flu and the latest virus and all this. So I'm really, really happy to be a part of your group. Why did you decide that it was necessary to create this event that we're hosting? It's on the 22nd of February for everyone who wants to attend in Edinburgh from basically 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. at Lauriston Hall, which is pretty close to the center of Edinburgh. £25 includes tea, coffee, lunch, and it's an all-day event. So I know when you first contacted me about this last year, it was still just kind of an idea in your head that you hadn't fully fleshed out yet. And I'm wondering if I could go back to that time you decided that you wanted to do this and we went and met for coffee. What was it that prompted you to think about creating this event?
Well, I'd seen the testimonies that had been coming out from the official Scottish COVID-19 inquiry, and they are absolutely harrowing. And I read through all of the testimonies, and I can tell you that I was in tears at times, hearing about the harms that had been done to people as a consequence of the measures that were taken by the Scottish government in 2019, particularly those people in care homes, particularly the most vulnerable in care homes, and also other people in care. And there are also many examples where people have been ill-treated in hospital as well. And this inquiry has cost £30 million so far, and there's barely a whisper of it in the mainstream media. And people need to know about what happened and need to reevaluate what happened. I think people are trying to memory hole that particular period of time, but it's absolutely essential that we understand what went on, and we need to understand who made the decisions, were those decisions in any way justified, and what kind of harms were consequent upon them, and who should we, in the end, hold to account for those actions. And in order to do that, I think we need to have a conference where we drop all the assumptions, or try and get rid of all the assumptions that have been fed into us by the propaganda. And in the absence of those assumptions, then maybe we can reevaluate exactly what happened, and we can see who is actually responsible and what should be done in the future. The official inquiry assumes that there was a pandemic, and it assumes that it was a very dangerous disease that was present, and that they were justified in doing this. And that's the ground from which all of the inquiry takes place. And then the inquiry is just about, well, how could we have done better next time? Well, I want to go back to the at the beginning, question those assumptions, and get a true picture of really what happened.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be speaking at this conference. And the part that you asked me to do was around the media campaign, around the propaganda and the fear that was being raised. And some of the work that I've been doing and looking at, I would say for any viewers who are watching us, please go back and look at the coverage from UK Column back in 2020 and 2021. As those of us who watched UK Column during that time know that they were, at the time, Mike and Brian and everyone on the team at that time was doing some of the best work possible to uncover the fear campaign, the SpyBee, the SAGE, the Mindspace documentation. And, as a result of some of the prompting of some of our other members on the executive committee, I've gone back even further into the film Contagion from 2011 that had the social distancing, it had the masks, it had the miracle vaccine that came out of nowhere, it had the stay at home. We can even go back into the 90s with the Outbreak film, where there was a virus that I think escaped from monkeys in Africa or something like that. And so I think that this is something that they have been sort of priming the public for a while, that there would be a pandemic, that there would be a virus. And Richard, if you would please explain to the audience as well that there are two words that you have told us as speakers that we're not allowed to say at the conference. Do you want to say what those are and why?
Yeah, those two words are pandemic and virus. So what people do is that they use pandemic in the term, they use it as a description of the time. They say during the pandemic. And that immediately concedes that there was a pandemic. And what we need to do is to go back and say, no, it was 2020. What happened in 2020? Not what happened during the pandemic. The other word that I want to expunge is virus, because what we know about, all that we know about, is something called COVID-19, which is nothing to do with the virus. It's a disease. The virus story is a possible explanation that has been put forward by those people in the government who wish us to believe that that is what is responsible. But all we know about is that there was a disease, and we should talk about the disease, and we should question whether actually was there any unusual disease. And we don't need to go into anything about viruses. That will just get us into controversies about whether or not viruses exist, and that's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. What is relevant is, was there a disease that was really serious that we needed to worry about? And if we can show that there wasn't, then all talk of viruses is just diverting our attention away from what's really important.
Yeah, and what I would say to that as well is that my mother died in December of 2021 on a personal note. She did not die of a virus. She died because she went into a hospital for a little bit of bruising after a fall, and she died on a ventilator. And she did not have a respiratory illness at the time. I know that much, but we did lose her, sadly. So I'm really personally invested in this work as well. Thanks so much for joining us today on the program, Richard. Unfortunately, we have to move on, but is there anything else that you wanted to add that we haven't covered?
No, thank you very much indeed for providing the publicity. All those people who are in any way near Edinburgh and are able to come along, we'd really like to see you at the conference. We will have question and answer sessions and time for you to contribute to the knowledge that we need. So thank you very much indeed for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you. Extremely interesting. And isn't it fascinating that very quickly in that little interview clip, we're back into the subject of truth and lies and propaganda. So, Ben, what a good place to welcome you to the news today. We can't trust national news. Can we trust local news?
Local, national, international, I don't think you can trust any of it, unfortunately, Brian, apart from UK Column, of course. Let me just get that out there. So let me start with a quote, which I love. It's a fantastic quote. comes from H.L. Mencken. Journalist is to politician as dog is to lamp post. And in that spirit, I shall proceed. Let's talk about LDRs, local democracy reporters. What are they? A fly-on-the-wall reporter explaining what local government decisions actually mean. Also, a reporter specialising in the workings of the local authority. A political reporter scrutinising councils, police, NHS and other public bodies, holding local authorities to account and getting people to care. That all sounds great, doesn't it? Let's find out a little bit more about the LDR scheme.
Local councils spend billions of pounds a year providing essential services which affect all our lives. They look after everything from bins to buses to social care. So knowing what they're up to is vital. The number of local journalists reporting on councils has been in steady decline. And that's where the Local Democracy Reporting Service, or LDRS, comes in. The LDRS finds out stories about UK councils and shares them with hundreds of regional news providers across the country. Local news companies employ 165 local democracy reporters. The BBC pays for them, and more than 1,000 approved news outlets can then broadcast or publish their work. And that means you and me, wherever we live in the UK, get to hear about what our councils are doing in our name. It helps the local news industry, it helps the BBC, but most of all, it helps us all know what's going on where we live. You can find out more by going to bbc.com/LNP.
Oh, okay. So it's the BBC covering for local councils. That's what it turns out to be. And actually, if you go to the LDRS website and you look in the, this is literally one page. This is all there is to the site. And in the top right-hand corner, you can click on terms and conditions. And in the bottom left, you can click on frequently asked questions. And it takes you directly to the BBC. Yeah. Oh, my clicker's stopped working for some reason. Would you mind knocking that on for me, please, Brian? Yeah, okay, very good. So if we just whiz through those two, yeah, it's BBC. It's a BBC operation. There are 165 of these people all across the UK, working at places like the Manchester Evening News, Hackney Citizen, the Liverpool Echo, and let's get a little taste of the kind of reporting that we can expect from these people. So we just click on to the next one. There you go. It's that kind of reporting. Yeah. So we just talked about the COVID scenario. That's what I like to call it, by the way. I think 2020, yeah, that's good. But let's call it the scenario or the operation, certainly not the pandemic. But you can see here in the mask, a local democracy reporter talking about the local council's policy towards COVID and lockdowns. It gives you a sense of what you're going to be getting from these people. And that's Charlotte Hall, and she works at the Oldham Times. And LDRs have been reported on for a while now by the UK column. They've been around for a couple of years, but this was flagged up to me in that interview I did a couple of weeks ago with Raja Mia. I hadn't personally heard of them before, but he mentioned that the Oldham Times actually employs a local democracy reporter. It's that lady we just saw in the mask, Charlotte Hall, and this is a recent article that she's published about council tax, which again I don't think gives you a good sense of what these reporters are doing and the level of scrutiny that they're applying. If you want to just flick that forward again for me, please, Brian, that'd be fantastic. We can see a quote here about council tax going up in Oldham, and it basically says, after receiving £5 million more from the government than first expected, Oldham is in a better financial position than first thought, but the local authority still needs to fill a £14 million budget hole from this year and make more than £8 million in cuts to stay in the green. So to do that, council chiefs will increase council tax by the maximum amount. The 5% or 4.99% increase will see council tax bills rise by £77 to £1,628 per year for the lowest band, £232 increase for the highest band, up to nearly £5,000 a year in council tax. And this is just going to happen. Right, so essentially, based on the Oldham Times, what the local democracy reporters are doing is just providing a mouthpiece, a platform for council policy. Right, that's it. And it's all paid for by the BBC, and it's all designed to progress the establishment agenda. Right? I think that's exactly what's happening here. And what else was going on in Oldham at the time? What else was the council involved in, apart from issuing demands for more council tax? Well, we know that, for example, they were covering up grooming gang scandal, and they were publishing a number of hit pieces, 17 hit pieces, in fact, on Raja Mir, who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, who was actually pointing out extraordinary levels of corruption in the council, but being attacked by Oldham Times, who employ a local democracy reporter. I think you get a good sense of what this is about, right? You know, and local media is in big trouble, and this LDR scheme is absolutely at the centre of it. I think councils, particularly given that we're seeing councils now cancelling elections, this year they're going to be cancelling elections. There is an absolute crisis in local media, and we need a completely new approach. Now, a bit of an update on the national media scene. I'm going to talk again about Tortoise, and I will probably need to do a longer check-in on them because there's a lot of stuff going on. But we spoke before Christmas about the fact that they just acquired The Observer, and as an extension of that, basically merged essentially with Guardian Media Group. They've just announced two co-CEOs. You can see on the left Emma Sullivan, who was the MD of Tortoise, and on the right, Richard Finesse, who was the Chief Strategy and Business Development Officer at the Guardian Media Group. He was there for 27 years. And those two are now going to be running Tortoise. They're going to be co-chiefs of the Tortoise business. James Harding made a statement, just click on one, saying that establishing The Observer as an independent company is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, which is interesting, actually, James Harding, because it's not an independent company, as we talked about previously. Like, you've basically merged with the Guardian Media Group, so you're being a bit liberal with the facts there, I would say. Also in that article, it goes on to say that Tortoise has appointed Beja Cummings to the position of digital editor of the new daily online paywalled version of The Observer. And this is Beja Cummings. You can see her here. She's been leading the audio arm, Tortoise Studios, where she was responsible for podcasts. And that includes responsible for publishing the takedown of Raja Mir that they published a couple of years ago now, as well as Hoaxed, which badly misrepresented the Hampstead supposed hoax, missing out key medical evidence that demonstrated that the children in question were actually sexually abused. They just decided to remove that from their 6-hour-long podcast episode, supposedly proving that whole thing was a hoax. She's been given a promotion as well. Also, going back to my report last week, I've been sent a really interesting link between actually Tortoise Media and Common Purpose. So if you remember, I highlighted the existence of this strategic partnership between the University of Manchester and Common Purpose. Actually turns out that this gentleman, Nazir Afzal, is the Chancellor of the University of Manchester, so he would have established that partnership, something he would have been responsible for. And this is a fascinating character. He's got an OBE, so this is a proper establishment fella. He's also the chair of the Safeguarding Committee at the Church of England, interestingly. As a practicing Muslim, I find that absolutely bizarre. I think we're going to talk about that in extra. And then before that, he was the CEO of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. So these people who are supposed to be looking into things like grooming gangs, he was the chief executive of that. And before that, he was the chief Crown Prosecutor, and he used to work for Keir Starmer, interestingly. And he's just set up this Common Purpose thing, and he's got very close links into Tortoise Media through a couple of appearances. One on this interview, which is up on YouTube, talking about whether there's such a thing as a fair trial. And then also, finally, this, if we click on one, we can see this live event in Manchester, which took place last year, talking about populism. And essentially, he was there to talk about the threats to democracy posed by people like Donald Trump. And he was interviewed by James Harding, direct link to Common Purpose there from Tortoise Media, which is the first time I've seen that. And also, interestingly, something I'm going to come back to next week because I haven't got time today, he was also on that panel with Joshi Herman from Mill Media, who are the other people who are very aggressively going after Raja Mir. So local media, national media in big trouble right now.
Thank you very much, Ben. And of course, it's beholden on all of us to be watching very carefully what media is in existence and what they have to say. But certainly we've got huge suspicions about media conglomerations which are getting more and more powerful and controlling more and more of the news we hear. We'll continue to report. Now, a huge thank you, as always, to our supporters. We can only do what we do with your financial support. If you're already a member of UK Column, thank you very much. But you can help us, if not, by making a donation. You can also, of course, take out a monthly membership or an annual membership or a lifetime, as many people do. All of those things are good to help. And of course, you can also help by purchasing through the shop. And we like to remind people that we have Clive de Carle health products, and we do make a small percentage on purchases of those health products through the shop. But the most important thing probably is that the material we produce is to be shared in order to help inform and educate people. And we're doing this as widely as we can. But if you, the viewers, members of UK Column, will help us by sharing material, that would be wonderful. Now, a key announcement is that tickets for UK Columns On Location, which will be Saturday, the 5th of April in Cheltenham, those tickets are now on sale on the UK Column website. That's £125 for an early bird ticket. And I'm going to say we think we have a really tremendous venue. We've taken note of what people have said from our previous On Location, and this particular location in Cheltenham will allow people to be together much more easily and to stay together, not only, of course, during the day and the speaking events, but also when you are socialising at meal times and also into the evening. So more on that in due course. Now, we'd also like to give people a reminder that it's the annual conference for Public Child Protection Wales. That's the 22nd of February, and that will be near Newport, South Wales. Have a look at the Public Child Protection website for details of that, but a lot of very good guest speakers. And this is for tomorrow. Apologies there for the date. It should be the 11th, of course. But we have an interview going out, Sandy Adams and the vet, Roger Meacock. We've been talking about inheritance tax for farmers. This one will be moving on to have a look at the bigger agenda, including, are we heading for a famine? So we'll encourage you to have a look at that. Now, where does that take us? I think that brings us on to you, Diane, and the subject of EDI.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. With all of the recent executive orders and so on that Trump has been putting into place in his first couple of weeks in office, there are a lot of people who are hopeful that the issue of EDI or DIE or DEI or whatever you want to call it, basically diversity, equity, inclusion, will be going away because he's basically mandated now, at least within the US federal government. But what I want to look at is what's going on. There's some progress. There's still a lot of pushback going on. And I really think that this is actually a very divisive and regressive thing to be doing, not a progressive thing, as the liberals would say. And also, as some people say on social media, as we have on the slide here, the left can't meme, which is something that basically saying that the people on the left don't know how to make memes that are actually funny. In this case, these are some that I've seen just over the weekend from people that I know personally on some of my social media sites who are on the left. And just to give you an example of the kind of things that they're using to kind of tell people this is all entirely wrong. I'll read them out. Never in the history of ever were the people who were against diversity, equity, and inclusion the good guys. So apparently I'm one of the bad guys. I'll take it. That's fine. And not all Trump supporters are overtly racist or ableist or misogynist, but every one of them decided hating people with brown skin, disabilities, or women wasn't a deal breaker. Own that decision. Well, I would say that's not true because I know people in all three of those categories who do support Trump. So something is going on there. We have the executive order that was signed last week that was called Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, that was signed on the 5th of February. And it says it is the policy of the United States to resign all funds from educational programs that deprive women and girls of fair athletic opportunities, which results in the endangerment, humiliation, and silencing of women and girls and deprives them of privacy. So you see Trump there surrounded by girls who are clearly pretty happy that this is taking place. So this, as well as some of the other executive orders that Trump has put into place, has given some people some hope. There was another one that ordered basically the DEI terminology to be removed from the federal workforce, federal contracting and spending. So some people have lost their jobs. Large departments have been basically taken away out of the government. There's a lot of unemployed people who were making a lot of money off of the DEI scam. One of the things that's in the show notes, you can read more detail, is that something that's happened to journal articles that are in press or funding applications that were in progress. If they use words such as gender, transgender, pregnant person, pregnant people, LGBT, non-binary, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, etc., are now just being, they have to go back to them and they have to have those bits of terminologies removed. And so you can imagine the people that support this are really in meltdown mode. But here in the UK, whether or not this is a result of what Trump has been doing or not, I don't know. But all of the major departments in Whitehall have now dumped the Stonewall diversity schemes. And Stonewall calls this the gold standard for LGBTQ plus inclusion, which they claim on their website is meant to help the success of any company that adopts these schemes. But we're seeing more and more that these are starting to go away. And this includes the Home Office, it includes the Treasury. So again, a lot of the major departments in Whitehall. And what they're finding is that there was a lot of backlash going on because they were prioritizing gender identity over the reality of biological sex and allegedly favoring the trans rights at the expense of women's rights. And I guess we could say men's rights as well. I want to focus here on a tribunal that's going on currently up here in Scotland in Fife. There's a tribunal in Dundee for this woman, Sandy Peggy, who is a nurse in the NHS Fife area. She has been suspended from her job for not wanting a so-called trans woman, biological man, in the women's changing room at work. And she felt obviously uncomfortable that for her that there was a physical man, biological man, changing clothes in front of her. This is a doctor that now wants to be referred to as Dr. Beth Upton, is the name that this doctor is going by, who was in the women's changing room. And there were a couple of things going on that basically Dr. Upton felt like misgendering was offensive. And so she's been suspended for this accusation. One of the most ridiculous things that happened leading up to the start of the tribunal was that she had to get special permission to refer to Dr. Upton as a he, him, as a man, because that is in fact what he is, and that's what she believes Dr. Upton is. But she had to get special permission to be able to do that. So there's been accusations on both sides about being harassment, about being disrespectful, about misgendering, and so on. So we'll continue to watch that because I believe the tribunal is still ongoing. This next one is something that was sent to me by a UK column member and friend. This actually started in 2022, but it's worth it. It's just come out recently in the mainstream media. The Science Museum has a tour called Seeing Things Queerly. Legos are heteronormative. And I just want to read this quote out to show you what it's saying about Legos, which all children play with. Like other connectors and fasteners, Lego bricks are often described in a gendered way. The top of the brick with sticking out pins is male. The bottom of the brick with holes to receive the pins is female. And the process of the two sides being put together is called mating. This is an example of applying heteronormative language to topics unrelated to gender, sex, and reproduction. Now, the friend who sent this to me made the point of, if a person is non-binary, then perhaps that might be like the game Jenga, where there are no pins or no holes or nothing, but nothing works anyway, and you struggle to keep it all together. So we're not really sure how that works out. Yasmin Benoit is the next person I would like to go on to, who has made a name for herself, I think it's a her, as a lingerie model, as an asexual lingerie model. So that is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction or very little. Is now also a visiting research fellow at King's College London in the area called the Policy Institute. She doesn't seem to have a PhD. She doesn't have a publication record. I don't know what she's done other than be an asexual lingerie model. But anyway, she now has an appointment at King's College London. And she's been part of this report that came out earlier this month on asexuality across the UK. They surveyed 400 people, I believe it was, about their public attitudes towards people who experience little to no sexual attraction, making the point that asexuality is not protected as a sexual orientation, and so they are worried about being prosecuted under hate crime laws, while also leaving the community vulnerable to continued medicalization and conversion therapy. Outside of the human sexual spectrum, we now have an Australian high school teacher who identifies as Miss Purr. Miss Purr is a teacher at there she is with her whatever it is, a photograph up there, Marsden State High School in Queensland, Australia, where she teaches. And students say that Miss Purr has been hissing at students and licking their hands. So it's not just the students who are now identifying as cats, it's now also the teachers. So to raise these issues, I want to go and just play a short clip from the Representative Jasmine Crockett, who is a Democrat from Texas serving in Congress currently. And I want you to hear what she had to say about race on CNN recently.
That's what's happening right now. I am tired of the white tears. Listen, if you are competent, you are not concerned. When I walk into Congress every single day, you know why I don't feel a way and why you can't make me doubt who I am is because I know that I had to work 10 times as hard as they did just to get into the seat. When you look and you compare me to Marjorie Taylor Greene or me to Lauren Boebert, there is no comparison. And that is the life that we have always lived. So the only people that are crying are the mediocre white boys that have been beaten out by people that historically have had to work so much harder. This is why they don't want us to have education.
So, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert are both white women serving along with her. And you can hear that the hate, the anger that's going on in there. Just a couple of stories about universities and race that kind of puts that in perspective is that the universities in the UK are now being required to champion diversity, basically showing how many students they have that are not white. To kind of show how much funding is coming in for those students that are not white, so Black, Asian, mixed race, and so on. So that has to be a higher percentage now. Otherwise, the universities will start to lose their funding from the government. And that is all, again, part of EDI initiatives. And recently, Oxford and Cambridge are saying that they're no longer going to have traditional exams if they can possibly help it, because that will improve the results of minorities. They want to use inclusive assessments, such as open book exams or take-home papers, instead of the traditional in-person exams, which to me sounds a bit racist personally. And with that, I want to close with a video clip from Martin Luther King in 1963. And I want to point out that this leader of the Civil Rights Initiative in the United States wanted equality and not equity. And I believe that he would probably be seen as racist today. Let's have a reminder of what he said.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
So it's interesting to me, Brian, that in the process of what is seen to be going forward, we're actually going backward away from what he wanted. He wanted us all to be sitting at the table and be judged by our character and what we bring to the world and not by our skin color. EDI does the exact opposite to me, and that's just my opinion.
I absolutely agree, Diane. It should be so simple. We should just be people getting on with our lives, enjoying our families, enjoying our communities, but it's all made ever more complex. And of course, the media and the global media are fully behind the divisive policies which are now unfolding and being spread amongst us. So, Ben, let's bring you back. I'll ask you the question, can we trust the globalist mainstream media?
I think you know the answer to that one, Brian. No, of course we can't trust them. And we're going to talk about one of the mechanisms through which global governance is projecting power. It's seizing control of local media ecosystems across what it likes to call the global south. It all relates to this organization, the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which states that its vision is that people worldwide live in healthy information ecosystems with access to media that upholds the public interest. Now, what does public interest media actually mean? Let's read their definition. Yeah, so it provides fact-based information in a trustworthy manner. It demonstrably embraces the pursuit of truth, for example, through sourcing practices and proper representation of the audiences it hopes to serve, is editorially independent, which is kind of hilarious when you get into the report and you find out who's behind this, and is transparent about the processes, funding and policies used to produce it. Right, so that all sounds great, doesn't it? And apparently they're into independent media. But let's have a little look at who funds the fund. Oh, it's these people. So Western governments, Estonia, New Zealand, France. In fact, we've got China in the mix. They're funding this. USAID are there, although probably not there anymore. If anything, from the past couple of weeks tells us anything. But you've still got the National Endowment for Democracy, Google, Microsoft, big tech titans are in the mix. And then, of course, the international foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, and importantly, the Ford Foundation, who were really the kind of keystone founder of IFPIM. And we're going to hear now from Hilary Pennington, the Exec VP of Global Programs at the Ford Foundation, about why they think that this program is so important.
There is a shared purpose between IPIM and the goals that the Ford Foundation promotes and invests in. We share with all of you in this room a vision of robust, independent journalism, well-funded, and healthy media ecosystems across the world. These play a necessary, critical role in fostering strong civic engagement, a priority of the Foundation. It is essential that individuals and societies are empowered with accurate information to engage in and make decisions about issues that affect them. And at the same time, nurturing robust, independent journalism cuts across the entire work of the Ford Foundation, all of our other priorities as well, which is what journalism does. It informs the public about matters of global governance, equitable use of resources, gender response, climate response, gender, racial and ethnic justice, freedom of expression, and more. Accurate, inclusive, and editorially sound journalism furthers all those goals.
I think someone needs to explain to her what independent means. If you've got all of these funds and international corporations and Western governments putting money into media ecosystems in developing nations, global South nations, as they like to call it, then they're not independent, right? And there's very clearly an agenda here, because what she's talking about is global governance, equitable use of resources, the climate response, gender, racial, and ethnic justice, freedom of expression. I can guarantee you that woman has no interest in actual freedom of expression. Where are they operating? All over the world, actually. As I said, it's mainly focused on what they call the global south, so LATAM, Africa, Ukraine and Georgia, you know. So Georgia, there's a huge democratic issue going on there at the moment. There's an enormous amount of pushback happening on the ground against the democratically elected new government, and maybe these people are behind it. I don't know. They're also in Nepal, they're in Indonesia, all around the world. and it's a huge fund. It was set up, as I think I said, in 2022. They've already raised a lot of money and distributed a lot of money. They've got big plans to do even more. So this is from their strategy for 2026 to 28. They want to raise $150 million. They want to give that to 300 media outlets, reach 280 million people in 50 countries. And in that period, they'll be covering, and that really means manipulating and controlling the outcomes of 30 democratic elections. Yeah, that's really what this is about. The UN's behind it. Antonio Guterres, SecGen from the UN, says here, I urge member states, donors and other stakeholders to support this vital new endeavour. So you've got the blessing from the very top of the international political establishment. Who's on the board? As ever, some impressive people. I'm going to draw your attention, first of all, to this fella here on the right-hand side. That's Pascal Lavie. He is the former Director General of the World Trade Organization. He's currently the president of the Paris Peace Forum, which is where this organization was founded, right? So that was 3 years ago. And the Paris Peace Forum is taking place today and tomorrow. So it's basically the third anniversary of IFPIM. And I'm going to talk about Paris Peace Forum next week because they're a fascinating organization at the center of a lot of this stuff. But then in exec positions here, you've got Maria Ressa, who I'd never heard of before. You can see her on the left. She was formerly a top executive at CNN. She actually set up CNN in the Philippines and was there for nearly 20 years. And her co-chair is Mark Thompson, who we talk about all the time. He's the former Director General of the BBC, currently the global CEO at CNN. When he was at the BBC, he oversaw the Jimmy Savile cover-up. And he's also an investor in Mill Media, who are basically doing a similar thing to what IFPIM are doing here in the UK. Mill Media is basically a power grab, frankly, to take control of local media ecosystems, and it's personally backed by Mark Thompson, right? So he's using what he's learned here in his work with IFPIM. And actually, let's have a little, a bit of something here from Mark Thompson about the background to this whole program.
Around the world, we're living through a full-scale crisis in independent media. Repressive governments are certainly often a factor, but actually the biggest single cause is economic. Over the past 20 years, journalists have lived through a cataclysmic failure in our traditional business models, with advertising fleeing to big tech and readers to social media and a kind of digital Wild West of truth, rumours and outright lies. Global newspaper revenue went down by 2/3 from 2010 to 2020 and has gone down by a further 39% in the 5 years since, the hard years during and after COVID. In Brazil, for instance, at least 942, nearly 1,000 news organizations have closed down since 2020. In Bangladesh, 254 newspapers shut down during the COVID pandemic, leaving only 86 operating. When a few years ago the UN Secretary General talked about a media extinction event, those kinds of numbers, the scale of what's happening, not always clear to people in the West, is what he was talking about.
A media extinction event. And that's an astonishing term. And actually, I think it's borne out by the facts. And actually, I'm going to introduce you to a new acronym. This one is the side effect is the intention. Yeah. CT. Oh, is that going to click on? There we go. CT. That's from Michael Driver. Thank you for that, Michael. The side effect is the intention. Yeah, so big tech has destroyed the media ecosystem. COVID has destroyed the media ecosystem. So UN, who cooked up COVID, and big tech plow a load of money into this fund so they can go and take over local media across all of these countries. Yeah, all this stuff is connected, right? So we've heard from Mark Thompson. Let's hear now from Maria Tessa, or at least we're going to have a little look at some of the things that she's spoken about. So as we said, they're co-chairs. What does Maria Tessa have to say about things? So she says, without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, no democracy, and it becomes impossible to deal with our world's existential problems. I agree with most of that. Without facts, you can't have truth. I think that's a really valid thing to say. Let's have a little look at a fact here from Maria Ressa. Transgender women can breastfeed. This is from her Twitter profile. So she's really interested in facts and truth. That's what she's posting. The kind of truth that gets you standing ovations in the satanic throne room at the Vatican. And actually, here, there she is. You can see her on stage in a little red outfit, just standing up. That's her getting a standing ovation in that weird satanic throne room at the Vatican. What other rooms has she been hanging out in? Well, let's have a little look here. This is from Lisa Witter, that we talk about a lot and haven't really focused on much over the past few weeks. Wouldn't have to drag Lisa back out over the next month or so. She's been up to a lot, not least hanging around with all of these ladies. You can see Lisa Witter there, Chief Executive of the Apolitical Foundation, young global leader of the World Economic Forum, Hala Tomasdatter, formerly Chief Executive of the B Team, now President of Iceland, Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, and also Maria Ressa, who is the IFPIM co-chair. And actually, you can see just about those little badges that they're all wearing, the green and the yellow badges, that makes them dandelions. So there's another network, which I'm going to talk about next week. They're all dandelions, and that's what's driving a lot of this climate activity at the moment. And just finally, in a completely unrelated slide, I'm just going to show you this, which is the Whore of Babylon. And upon her forehead was the name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Over to you, Brian.
That's a key point, I think, for us to end, because we've certainly given the audience something to think about, but so much to discuss in your piece there on the media, because when I heard them saying the job of the media was to inform the global public about global government, I mean, there's not a lot being hidden from these people, is there? But Mark Thompson's little speech there on video I regarded as purely good news, because of course he was talking about the demise of the mainstream media, which has basically prostituted itself to these global government organizations who want to control us, not let us lead happy and fulfilling lives. We'll end there. So I'm going to say thank you very much to our guests and to you, Ben and Diane. I'm hoping that Professor Ennos will be able to join us for extra time. We'll see whether that will happen. But for those of you that are members of UK Column, do stay on. We'll be live for UK Column Extra in a few moments. For everybody else, thank you for joining us. Remember the interview going out at 1 o'clock tomorrow, but we'll be back for news on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Please join us then. Bye-bye.